Hello. Sorry for the delay. There was a connection issue. This is the age that we live in. So I'm hoping that you are waiting for us and that you will be joining. Andrei Biziorek is about to join me any second now. And I appreciate everyone who has been waiting. Again, sorry for the delay. We are doing our best to keep that connection going. And so now the phone is cooperating, the Wi-Fi is cooperating, everything is cooperating. So I'm just waiting for my moderator now. Hello, everybody. I see wonderful people showing up to join and to talk. We have a lot of questions that Andrei will be voicing when he joins me. And there is Andrei. So let me invite Andrei now to join. All right, waiting for Demidov Studio London, waiting for Andrei Biziorek. There he is.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So we overcame the all kinds of non-cooperative equipment and Wi-Fi and things like that. We're here. So
Yes.
let's jump to it then, shall we?
So, and welcome to everyone who's watching through Demidov Studio London as well, and otherwise. So we're going to be talking a little bit today about preparation for rehearsal in using Demidov technique, and also about Demidov scales. And maybe it might be a good idea if you just give us a little bit of an outline as to what the approach is in preparing the work, preparing to work for rehearsal using the technique. And we're going to talk a little about scales next, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's just, I think, put it in context, because what is this preparation or scales in the context of the Demidov technique? It's really huge, because a lot of the Demidov technique about making an actor independent. Therefore, homework preparation, what you do on a daily basis, becomes really, really important. Yeah. Rehearsal periods are not growing any longer in theater. In film, they already basically don't exist.
Yeah.
So the real question is, how do I arrive on a very short notice fully prepared? It's a bit more drastic in film than it is in theater, but in theater we are also experiencing 2-week rehearsal periods nowadays, right? And so if you, or less, if you actually begin to work at the first rehearsal, if you actually begin to prepare for this, when you go into rehearsals, you will end up with a very, very underdeveloped performance or very underdeveloped character.
Yes.
In film, you can be called on a very short notice. You might find out this morning that you're shooting tonight. So that question of preparation becomes even a larger issue. But what kind of preparation are we talking about? And this is where I think the division between Demidov technique and Stanislavski and many other methods come in. What is the focus of the Stanislavski system and a lot of methods that sprung out of it? The focus is not the actor. The focus is really the play, the script. Take all the terms, right? It can be action. Whose action? Character's action. Through line of action of what? Of the play, right? Super objective of what? Of the actor? No, of the character, right? Bits and tasks. Tasks, whose tasks, right? Whose bits? The bits of the play, right? The tasks of the character. These are all ultimately analytical techniques that are dedicated fully to working on the material. And you can argue whether or not they work as an actual something for the actor to do, but it's all dedicated to the material, to this particular role, to this particular character.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why when you use these techniques to master this particular role and this particular character, and then you are facing with a new role and a new character, you have to start from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You see, nothing in your work on your previous role or roles prepared you for your next role.
Mm-hmm.
It's very different with Demidov because the focus is not the role, not this particular role, but actor and actor's transformability per se. In other words, my ability to transform into any character,
Mm-hmm.
my ability to live spontaneously in the moment in any play, my ability to access my heightened emotions in any given circumstances.
Yeah.
So the instrument of the actor, when we say instrument, of course, we don't just mean body and voice, we mean psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And complete harmony and connection between psychology, body, and voice. So that's what Demidov is after.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if you work like that, if you constantly do your scales, right, if you constantly do your homework, certainly the periods between you receiving that part, you being cast, and you being able to live in character on stage or in front of the screen, they significantly shorten, but they shorten because you are doing your daily work. Right?
Do you want to say a little bit about what you mean by scales for people who perhaps don't know what that term is?
Well, it's interesting, right? We're jumping from preparation for the performance for the rehearsal to scales, right?
Yeah.
But maybe it's a good idea to start with scales, although I'm deviating from your first question, because probably if we want to put it in some kind of an order, right, we want to begin with scales, right? Scales is the most mystical thing, I think, in the actor's art, because for thousands of years, musicians have been playing their scales. Scales in music are very apparent. Scales for the actor, in other words, simple exercises that an actor should do on a daily basis and never skip a day. That has been a mystery. What is it that I absolutely must do on a daily basis? For musicians, it's not a question. They know exactly what they should do on a daily basis, so that when they come onto the stage, they're completely prepared, they're completely at ease. And this is not because they drilled their score. This is because every combination is in their fingertips, right? Every combination that they can meet in the score is actually there in their fingers, and they can play that combination by just looking at the score. So yes, they're drilling. Sometimes they're drilling very difficult passages, and you can hear them do it. You go to the opera, right? You go to the symphony or orchestra performance in the, let's say, in the interval, right? During the intermission, you hear some actors try out difficult passages, some musicians try out difficult passages, but that is actually probably because they're not as diligent with their scales, and they're slightly worried about it, right? But those musicians who play their scales, they are at ease, tremendous ease. Have you ever seen these musicians before the concert? They're completely relaxed, right? They're looking at the audience. They are so relaxed, it's disgusting, actually. And then imagine an actor pacing the wings before their entrance. They're completely unprepared in comparison with that musician's level of calm and tranquility and poise and confidence in themselves. Scales is the question.
Yeah, and sometimes running lines, which would be the equivalent to, drilling a difficult passage.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how then does that relate to make that parallel with the musician? How does it relate for the actor in terms of what it gives the actor to work on these scales at home?
Well, let's find out first what the scales are, right? So what do we know about scales from all other art forms that are a little bit, well, no, they're not older than ours. They just figured out their scales before we did, right? And why is it that these scales exist in all these other arts, in painting, for example, in drawing, right? In sports, certainly, in music, as we said, right? In writing as well.
Yeah.
Every writer is just doing that on an everyday basis. Writing letters like crazy. Why do you think writers leave so many letters behind? Right? Writing notes, constantly taking notes, constantly putting down all of their observations of anything even remotely interesting that happened. Right?
Yeah.
These are their scales. This is something that's keeping them actually current, right? So, but what do we know about scales? We know that they must be very simple, right? If you look at musician scales and compare them with Mozart, Beethoven, right? Or Shostakovich and Prokofiev, you will find out that these are very simple exercises, right? We know that they must be played daily, on a daily basis. Musicians say, I didn't do my scales one day, I hear it. I didn't do them 2 days, conductor hears it. I didn't do them 3 days, the audience hears it, right? Audience can tell. So regular. Yeah. So what is it for the actor? Really, what are these things and what are they doing actually? What are they allowing us to do? Well, first and foremost, they're allowing us to live on stage freely and spontaneously. They're creating the main, if you wish, the main quality in an actor. Ability to live freely in the moment. That absolute freedom of living in the moment, right? And so a very simple scale is, for the next 3 minutes, I will be doing what I feel like doing. And somebody might say, well, wait a second, that's what I do anyway in everyday life. I do what I feel like doing. Okay, when I'm alone, I certainly do what I feel like doing. And the word alone is the key word. Yes, absolutely. When you're alone, you are probably doing what you feel like doing, feeling what you feel like, feeling, thinking what you feel like thinking. But as soon as you appear in front of the audience, that goes away. That spontaneity, freedom, that absolute naturalness, right? It goes away. Something happens with us. We restructure, as Demidov says, right? We somehow feel that we are not enough, that we must be doing something. We must be looking in a certain way. We must be, and that prevents very often from our character that we do have inside us taking over, right? So when you're saying for the next 3 minutes, I'm going to do what I feel like doing, think what I feel like thinking, feel what I feel like feeling, you're immediately switching from everyday life realm into the realm of an exercise for the stage. And at that moment, the audience appears. And that audience is imaginary, but it is now allowing you to train that skill of absolute freedom of living on stage, for the camera, because you're now doing it in front of the imaginary audience. Just because you said for the next 3 minutes, I'm going to exercise. And now this skill is beginning to apply for the stage. Now, when you are in the presence of the audience, in front of the camera, right, you actually are living on stage freely and spontaneously because you've been exercising that on a daily basis. There are variations of that scale exercise, but we don't have time to go into it, right? But that's a basic one. And there are several others, right? One connected with all kinds of physical sensations, different times, different places, different times of day, different, seasons, different places, different physical sensations, as I mentioned, different events. Keeping this very mundane is very important, right? But it's an exercise where an actor creates several lists of different themes and then randomly, points their finger at that particular list and then reads the theme, for example, cold, piercing wind, right? And then does the very same thing. For the next minute, I'm going to do what I feel like doing, feel what I feel like feeling, think what I feel like thinking. And again, I give complete freedom to myself, but at the same time, my responsivity towards physical sensations is being trained, because physical sensations are at the very core of your life on stage. Physical sensations are very intricately connected with your emotions, with your psychology, with the events of the play. They actually can bring you into the given circumstances in a very strong way. But they're imaginary. On stage, it's never going to be cold when it needs to be cold, and never going to be hot when it needs to be hot, right? The same on a set, on a film set. It's never going to be the temperature that it should be according to the play. You're never going to feel physically what you need to feel, right? You're not going to be sober when you're actually drunk, drunk when you're actually sober, right? You're never going to actually have that headache, or you will have that headache, right? You're never going to be as relaxed as you're supposed to be. You're never going to be drinking what you should be drinking according to the play, right? You'll be drinking whatever they put in your glass, and so on and so forth. All of these physical sensations, they're creating the truth of the larger given circumstances. That's why part of the scales have a lot to do with physical sensations. The first impulse, which is at the very core of the Demidov technique, is also trained in the scales, because whatever the exercise is, you start off of that very first thing that happened to you in reality, be it a real thought that popped into your head, real physical sensation, for example, real emotion, and so on and so on. So that is also part of it. And then we are looking at several other exercises, obviously, that are essential exercises that need to be repeated on a daily basis. And out of them, I want to single out Demidov's etudes. Because first and foremost, we need to understand that Demidov's etudes is an essential scale that gives you a total workout and works every part of your instrument and every aspect of the theatrical process in a very simple exercise. That's what makes it etudes.
Yeah.
That's what makes these etudes actually scales.
Scale, yeah, yeah. So the combination of these things is helping us to train ourselves to surrender to that first impulse, whether it be a sensation, a thought, a feeling.
Yeah, and why on a daily basis? Why regularly? Because it either becomes a reflex, an instinct, and then it will always be with you. Or if it's not a reflex, if it's not an instinct, then you will always be behind yourself in your creative process.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why you want to work on that on a daily basis. At least 15 minutes a day. If you can do 30, great, right? But there are other things that actors have to attend to on a daily basis. So not to skip your scales and to do at least 15 minutes of scales a day will actually make you develop in leaps and bounds. But it seems easy not to skip 15 minutes a day. But when it actually comes to practicing that religiously, right? How many of us do?
Yeah.
Stanislavski said, if actors were to be told that to be great, they have to carry heavy buckets of water onto the 7th story every day for 3 hours, they would do it. If they were told that they need to play psychological scales, they would not do it. There's something about that psychological, spiritual involvement and workout and overcoming of that laziness, psychological, spiritual laziness, right? That prevents actors from, well, what prevents us from meditating on a daily basis? The same thing, isn't it, right? Because it's actually a spiritual effort. And because it's a spiritual effort, we right?
Oftentimes.
Same happens with scales, ultimately. But what happens when actors begin to do it on a daily basis is actually miraculous. I'm talking about Demidov scales, of course, which is the only technique, in my opinion, the only school that actually introduces actors to scales.
And of course, the etudes really are done with a partner, right? As a sort of
there are two ways of doing it, right? One way of doing it is doing it with a partner, exactly. And that's a classic Demidov etude. What does that mean for an actor? It means that you better have a good body in your town, right? Well, no longer so. Good body anywhere in the world, right?
We have Zoom now.
Exactly. Who is into etudes as much as you are, and with whom you actually want to do it, because it's not with everybody that you want to hang out on a daily basis to do that exercise, right? But if you have a good body, right, with whom you have very good relationship, another reason to keep good relationship with your fellow partners, right?
Yeah.
And with that person, you can actually enjoy doing that for 15 minutes a day, half hour a day, however long you can spare. That goes a long way. There are also single etudes, the ones that you do at home, when you assign a few lines and you assign a few actions, a few businesses, a few stage directions. You assign it, as Demidov says, you repeat it verbally, right? Giving yourself that assignment. Then you toss it out of your head, you empty, and again you give yourself full freedom, right?
Yeah.
And that is a solo etude. However, before you do these things, I strongly recommend that you actually take a course in the Demidov technique with a specialist, with an expert, because it's also very easy to misinterpret these exercises, and instead of training good qualities, actually begin to train in mistakes.
I was just going to say that,
and developing an anti-creative reflexes, an anti-creative kind of intuitive way of behaving. So that's the danger. Demidov never sent you home with etudes until you actually developed certain basic skills.
Yeah.
He was giving an example. He said, my brother's violin teacher, his brother was studying violin, does not allow my brother to tune his violin by himself. He always tunes it during the lesson, because he knows before my brother develops perfect pitch, perfect ear, he may be tuning it wrong, right? He actually may be tuning it approximately. And so instead of developing a perfect ear, he will develop an approximate ear. Can you imagine that calamity, right? Which is why that teacher never allowed that student of his to tune his violin on his own. So the same can be said of etudes, right? Before you can leave yourself alone and know what to want and what not to want, what to worry about and what not to worry about during these exercises, you actually may not be training the organic technique. You may be doing something else, worrying about the audience, even if it's an imaginary audience, worrying about what plot, what story you are telling, worrying about what character you are becoming in these etudes at home, and so on and so forth, right? And none of it, of course, is the point, right? But what is the point is only beginning to work, I think, when you have done and therefore habitualized some of the elements of the Demidov technique in the classroom.
I think that's a really good point to make, because it's very easy to take something on, to try it. It happens often, and then this is a very subtle process, and unless you know how to enter it, you can dismiss it very easily.
Quoting Demidov, it's intimate work. It's all work at home, right? It really is your intimate work, which probably is a good segue, is a good transition to preparation. Because preparation, of course, is work at home, and preparation is intimate work. And so an interesting thing comes in with Demidov, right? Because it is so unlike everything else that we've ever experienced, that technique. And if you really begin to think deeply about it, and once it begins to work for you, and it works for everyone, you begin to realize how many practices that we take for granted actually make absolutely no sense. How many theatrical rituals in theater and film we are going through only because that's how it's done. How do we know that's how it's done? Well, because actors before us did it like that. It may make absolutely no sense, but because that's how it's always done, right? So, for example, rehearsal is turned into a performance on a daily basis. If you really go to a rehearsal, you realize that what they want during that rehearsal is performance, performance, performance. Opening night, yesterday, right? When do we want that opening night? Preferably yesterday, right? So when do we want that opening night performance? Yesterday. So we are pressed for time. We are trying to achieve results, results, results. Give me results. Why? Why turn rehearsal into a performance? And most importantly, why spend precious energy that belongs to the audience during the rehearsal? For who? The audience is not there. The real target is not there, right? That audience, that humanity for who we actually work and for whom we should save every ounce of energy of the character's emotions, of the character's relationships, of the events and the circumstances. All of it must be accumulated during the rehearsals, not spilled, not wasted, because we are not limitless when it comes to energy. I mean, you and I are old people, right? But even 20-year-olds are not limitless when it comes to energy. By spilling your energy in rehearsal, you are depriving your audience of that energy. And then what do you have to do in performance? Push. Why do actors push? Why do they force? Why do they try to squeeze non-existent energy out of them? And why, as a result, they're so tense? Simply because instead of accumulating the abundance of energy during rehearsals, they wasted it all during rehearsals. And as a result, they arrive at the opening night completely depleted. But they know they need energy. They know it must be heightened. They know it must be huge. And so they begin to push, they begin to work, and we see that work. Right? And so if in rehearsals, preferably you should mostly orient yourself in what you will be doing on stage later. Really learn the conditions in which you will be operating on stage later and accumulating relationship, events, energy of the character, emotions, right? Then even better at home, right? You really need to be working on accumulation. So one of the part of the homework is really accumulation of energy for tonight's rehearsal, for tonight's performance, and accumulation of character. Character, apparently, as Demidov discovered, is also energy. And as every energy, it must be accumulated. You are not going to be able to make your phone call, Andrei, on your phone, which you're probably using now, right? If it's out of juice, which is why you're never going to forget to plug it into an outlet. Well, the same with character. If you don't accumulate the character first, then you have to perform that character. You have to fake that character. You have to pretend to be that character, because the character is actually not in you and the character is not spilling over. You don't have the abundance of the character's energy so that you can go and unleash it onto the audience and just simply flood the audience with that energy of the character. You have to fake it. You have to perform it, right? So that's why number one thing that you do in preparation is preservation, accumulation, the storing. And that's a huge part of homework. That's a huge part of preparation. That's not all, of course. It's far from being all, right? But accumulation and storing is a huge part of it.
Yes, and this leads into a couple of questions, actually. One that's just popped up and one that somebody sent me before. And of course, in Demidov, there are particular techniques for accumulating the character.
Correct.
And this takes, you know, some fine, intimate work to be able to acquire. Somebody is writing here, and I apologize again because I can't really see the name.
I have one more question.
there's
And
a
it
question
doesn't
here.
matter on which language will you
Yes.
speak. What is the most important in accumulating a role? What to build on, right? That was the question, right? Well, what's important in accumulating the role? What's most important is to practice it in etudes, because etudes is a, I mean, what is an etude? It's study in French. It's a study of what? Theater people, actors, they use etudes, directors, they use etudes to study a lot of things, right? And as I said before, in every other technique except Demidov's, it's really going to be the study of the play, the study of this particular play, the study of this particular character, which then gives you zilch for the next play and for the next character. That's why every time we begin to rehearse next play, next character, it's like we are starting our career from the very beginning again, because we're not prepared. In the Demidov, etude is a study of your process, of habitualizing the process, including the process of the creation of the role. Which role? Any role. Which character? Any character, right? Because the focus is on you, the focus is on the actor, the focus is not on the material. And once you, the actor, becomes a virtuoso of their emotions, body, and voice, then you can take it to any character. Virtuoso of transformation you become, right? You can take it to every character, obviously. And transformation doesn't become that laborious and difficult process that it usually is, where at the end of it, we are still playing ourselves. Well, not ourselves, really, but our beloved persona.
Yeah.
Our beloved mask, right? So the most important thing is to really take very simple etude, and preferably under the guidance of an expert, to learn what it is to delay all manifestations, to delay all actions, all words, and simply go into that mode of receiving the character, accumulating the character, surrendering to it, giving the embryo of the character a chance to survive. And then very, very subtly beginning to actually live in character, but subtly, so subtly that it's just different shadows of emotions and thoughts crossing your face. It's very subtle, delicate movements of the fingers. What you're doing, you are beginning to actually, if you wish, allocate yourself in that skin of the character, in the shoes of the character. You're beginning to, how should I put it, acclimate in the character's body. Character's body, the character's voice, the character's psychology, it's all inseparable, right? Inseparable. So that's what it is. But unless you train it first in these simple exercises in the Demidov etudes, it's not going to be as easy to jump to accumulating Othello, accumulating Desdemona, right? Accumulating those roles that you want to work on, right? Immediately. Everything needs to be first habitualized. Everything must become your reflex. Everything must become something that you are not worried about. Because actors, of course, in rehearsals will not have the courage to do it. In rehearsals, they feel result, result, result. I must immediately deliver, right?
Opening night.
I mean, my God, they're afraid to shut up in rehearsals, right? Because the character is not there. If I shut up even for 3 seconds, I will reveal my complete emotional and psychological bankruptcy. So pick up your cues, speak, 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 right? Move it, move it, move it, right? So that the illusion of characters and life is created. So rehearsals is not the time to do it. The time to do it is during that intimate work on self. And on your skills and on your process that only happens at home. That's why we bunch together, right? The accumulation of the character, the preparation, the accumulation of energy, and the scales. Because this is part of the work that belongs to homework. Again, we're scratching the surface. We are just beginning to talk about it, right? But what else can we do? Andrei, other questions that perhaps you received in advance of our meeting, because I'm looking at time and we have,
that's gone quickly.
Yeah, it's going quickly. Yeah.
I guess just to lead on from, I mean, I had a few questions that were sent to me, but just to lead on from what we were just speaking about. And by the way, I should probably say that when we speak about etudes, we're not talking about Stanislavski etudes, right?
No, we're talking about Demidov etudes that are basically a complete reverse of Stanislavski's, right?
Yeah.
Polar opposite to Stanislavski. Everything is different because the focus is different. Because the focus is, again, on your instrument, on developing you, the actor, your skills, your talent, first and foremost.
I think you've probably answered this to a large degree, but somebody wrote, should the actor work on given circumstances prior to rehearsal? We're talking about accumulating character.
That's another aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
And that is, now I want to work on this character. I want to work on this play, right? I want to prepare for this rehearsal, right? And that's a different work. Now, working on yourself versus working on material, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think the given circumstances really are not only demystified by Demidov, but given their real weight and real power. Because what did Stanislavski say? He said, oh, I didn't invent my technique. I modeled it on the great actors. And then he names these actors. Among them, for example, Maria Yermolova, Eleonora Duse, right? And so on and so forth. So he says, I watched them work. I watched them on stage. I found certain commonalities and I put it into technique. Right? Wonderful statement, except did any of these actresses who had technique do anything similar in their preparation and their process to what Stanislavski suggests? No. Maria Yermolova, the great Russian tragedian of whom Stanislavski said, Maria, if you traveled internationally, no one would even speak of Duse. So that actress, right, who could galvanize the audience, whose sled was carried in the dead of winter from the theater to her house by the audiences, right? Not because she was a star, because after her performance, very often a political manifestation would break out outside of the theater. That was the power, and she was doing a classical play. She was doing Fuenta Vihuna.
Right.
Right? So that was her power. Now, when she heard about tasks and objectives, which younger actors were telling her about, right? The big contribution of Stanislavski, she just turned red and she said, oh my God, you are so happy, you know it all. In my days, we didn't know anything about that. This was not their process. What Stanislavski suggested has nothing to do with the process of all of these great actors from whom he supposedly took it. They didn't break anything into bits. They did not find actions and verbs. They did not know anything about through line of actions of what did they work with? Given circumstances. They surrendered themselves with the given circumstances that belonged to their characters. And they actually began to live in these circumstances. They assumed these given circumstances as their own. And so that work is certainly productive. But again, you need to know how to do it. You need to know how to magnetize these given circumstances so that they begin to pull you and push you. And they begin to become real forces. Real forces in the space that actually start acting for you and start moving you to go into all of these different directions in which you should go as a character. Because why is it that we act and do what we do in life? Because of the given circumstances in our lives. The same on stage. But how to actually prepare the given circumstances so that they begin to be these huge magnetic forces and energetic fields and forces that begin to galvanize you into action. That is an art. And it has a lot to do with how you learn your lines, because believe you or not, your circumstances are all encoded in your lines. And I'm going to say horrible thing now, not only in your lines, but in your partner's lines. The ones that we usually completely ignore, right? Bullshit, 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 my line, right?
Exactly.
What do we do when we take a yellow marker and do this with all of our lines? We basically erase everything else is what we do. And yet the given circumstances are not only in our lines, they're mostly in other people's lines about us. How to actually turn these lines into given circumstances is a technique, right, which is part of the homework, part of the preparation, which in Demidov is called the emotionally tactile reading of the text. The emotionally tactile reading of the text. And again, we are not going to talk about it, obviously, at length, because it's from that, area of kids don't do it at home, right? Kids go to the circus and then kids are told, don't try it at home. Don't do that to your cat, right? So it's one of these things that is connected with a violin, right? Now, of course, that exercise is in the glossary of becoming an actor creator, the book that together with Margarita Laskina, I was able to publish in 2016 with Routledge. But once again, right, there's a lot of work and a lot of prerequisites that will lead you toward mastering it. I think that are essential. And again, if you can do practical training with an expert ahead of venturing into all these other aspects of the Demidov technique, that would be really preferable.
Well, like with any theory or principle, I mean, it's just better to do it with somebody who knows what they're doing.
That's what Demidov says. It's very important to put practice ahead of theory, because when you're reading something, having not practiced it, you immediately understand it. You immediately say, I know what this is about. Oh, yeah, that's the same thing that Stanislavski says. That's the same thing that Meisner says. Oh, yeah, that's Michael Chekhov. No, it's not. You're just hearing familiar things. And instead of referring it to the real experience, relating it to the real experience of the Demidov technique, you're relating it to what you've already done or heard before, completely missing the point.
I get that question a lot. This seems to be very similar to Meisner after having done it.
Which is a very good sign that these people know nothing about this, right? Because, of course, every credible teacher is going to agree on some basics, but then what this teacher is actually going to do to achieve these basics, that varies a lot. And sometimes a lot of teachers proclaim some of the ideals that after Stanislavski graced the world became common ideals. But what they actually do to bring the actor to habitualize the techniques that lead to these ideals sometimes takes us astray, leads us astray completely from the ideals, right? And so there's a lot of things that are works in progress, techniques that worked under very particular circumstances with very particular people when taught a very particular way, which very often is not the way that it's explained in the books. Right.
And I think the question often comes from a place of when the people encounter Demidov for the first time, it's very different for them. And particularly the aspect of getting used to having nothing to play. That's one aspect that I think actors get very, that have to become accustomed to that.
But let's be very clear. When is it that you can afford to play nothing? When you accumulated an abundance of energy, emotional energy, when the energy of the circumstances is so electric that you can do nothing, but boy, will you actually be active? Will you actually be emotional? Will you actually be passionate, right? while you are not doing what actors are usually doing, which is doing it on your own, pushing it, performing it, forcing it, right? So that's what Demidov allows you to do. But again, that question of preparation, of homework, of accumulation is a huge issue. Or question of always being able to venture into the play as into something unknown. Good luck doing it after you rehearse that scene and that play 3, 5, 10, 30 times. Good luck going into that play for the first time when every aspect of it is completely known to you. This is where the Demidov's technique of forgetting comes in, right? No one else has it. Demidov has this problem solved because he has the technique of forgetting, which means he has the technique of rewinding, going back to square one so that you could experience the play for the first time, even if you are doing it for the 31st time or the 51st time, right? So that's another aspect of it. But all of it is techniques that you learn through very simple scales, or through very simple etudes.
Yeah. That's great, Andrei, and I think it's possibly something that we could continue talking about as well, possibly next week.
Very good.
Maybe this is a point to say that these workshops, these 2 intensives that you're leading on Zoom in June.
Yes, would you speak about it?
Yeah, that currently pretty much full. But if anybody is interested in doing these 2 intensives, do get in touch with me because often, not often, but sometimes it happens that somebody has to withdraw. So if you are interested, do get in touch. And, I can get in touch with you should something happen. These are on the 4th and the 8th of June and the 10th to the 14th of June from 3 to 6 p.m.
So that's 4th through 8th. Right, part 1, and 10th through 14th, part 2, right? They're basically filled, right? I mean, they are filled. But nevertheless, do get in touch with Andrei, right? That's Demidov School London. Also, feel free to go to demidovschool.com, which is Demidov School Moscow. There's also a form there that you can actually fill out and submit that form and express your interest that way. And we shall see. I mean, if there's a lot of people who would like to do that course, we may be able to open a second track, right? So that's the idea. Wonderful. So I have enough time to save this, right? So that those of you who didn't get a chance to come in from the very beginning could listen to this. And also those who didn't get a chance to join us today could also listen to this. And we'll be back next week, right? We'll try to come back next week. And please send questions also, because that's what we are doing. We're also reacting to the questions that you send, to the thoughts that you experience when we choose, experience and share, when we choose a theme for next broadcast, so to speak.
You send the questions through if you have anything that you would like to ask for next week, and we can prepare those. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Andrei, and thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Andrei. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Great being with you, and stay safe. Take care.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.